Welcome to the Common Man Football Show. My name is James Coburn, and today's episode we're doing another listener request from Dakota Tolley. It says, "Can you please do Solomon Thomas?" And yeah, I think we can do Solomon Thomas. Of course, I just did maybe a week ago, I did a Myles Garrett video on the topic and just kind of went to kind of the basics in terms of his profile. You can definitely just watch the sort of profile stuff I did on the San Francisco 49ers draft class, but if you want just a team or person specific sort of video, here you are. Now, for those that aren't familiar with the work that I do when it comes to analytics, if there's any terms you're not very familiar with, which market share data I think is a term that you may not be familiar with, athleticism stuff, explosive lower body strength score, speed score, flexibility score. If you don't know what these terms are, just go to the description. I'm going to leave the terms and the definitions in the description. You could also watch any of my past videos as well, where I went into somewhat of detail in terms of the methodology when it comes to these metrics. And if you still don't know, just ask a question. Leave a comment below. So if you don't really understand any of the sort of data stuff that I'm talking about or the metrics that I'm using, just leave a comment below and I'll, to the best of my ability, answer that question. And now let's get to Solomon Thomas. So starting with Solomon Thomas in terms of his production, I'm going to start with him as a defensive tackle and then him as a defensive end because I think there is interesting sort of differences between those two positions and what position he's going to play and all this kind of stuff. So starting with him at defensive tackle, because this is the position that he mainly played at Stanford in terms of a five-tech sort of position. And on top of that, at least according to the depth chart right now, which could be wrong, but Our has Solomon Thomas as a defensive tackle on the 49ers. So I figure, let's start with him as a defensive tackle and then look at him as a defensive end, which is what some people view him as a defensive end, and then also finish up with a player that I think some of you guys are familiar with, who's kind of similar to Solomon Thomas in certain ways. So starting with his production, he had a 96.92 solo tackle market share score, a 89.90 sack market share score, and a 95.11 tackle for loss market share score. The only number that I think you should really pay the most attention to when it comes to defensive tackle data is the solo tackle market share score, because as you can clearly see, sack market share and TFL market share is not really the end of the world when it comes to defensive tackles, and that's mainly because of the position that they're playing. I'm trying to get more specific in terms of finding an objective way to say, okay, this is what a nose tackle is, this is what a 5-tech is, this is what a 3-tech is, and then being able to compare their production to those types of guys. I'm trying to get more focused in on that sort of stuff. But for the most part, sack market share and TFL market share, in a general sense, is not the most correlative sort of data to the position, but I still think it's important because, as you can clearly see, even all-pro players, the bottom threshold is at least average sack market share. So I think that's kind of what you're looking for. You're looking for guys who at the very least are average when it comes to their ability to create sacks, average when it comes to their ability to create TFLs, but they do need to be above average when it comes to solo tackle market share, which in general speaks to how often they're on the football field and how often they affect plays away from the line of scrimmage as well. Because I think that's one of the bigger sort of the bigger sort of aspects of solo tackle market share is just their ability to affect things past the line of scrimmage, and I think that solo tackle market share does a very good job of putting that into perspective. Then when it comes to Solomon Thomas in terms of his athleticism data, at the defensive tackle position, he had an 86.71 explosive lower body strength score, 94.65 speed score, and a 98.50 flexibility score. Based on my data since 1999, he pretty much hits every single bottom end threshold when it comes to all-pro potential and Pro Bowl potential in terms of his athleticism traits at the position. So there's really nothing preventing Solomon Thomas from being a special defensive tackle prospect. I understand that people put a lot of stock into his size and this other kind of stuff, but the one thing you can't discount him on is that he's a very athletic player for his size. So I would just say that there's really nothing preventing him purely as an athlete from performing well at the defensive tackle spot, despite the fact that a lot of people put so much stock into size and those other sort of things. And then when you get to his edge, so now we're looking at his data compared to DN and 3-4 outside linebacker players. And when you look at his data here, he's actually tests pretty decent even here. I do understand that he didn't play. From what I remember watching when I watched Solomon Thomas, he did play inside. He did play a little bit outside, but not a ton. So the fact that he actually performed really well compared to DN and 3-4 outside linebackers, who traditionally are going to put up better numbers in terms of solo tackle market share and tackle for loss market share and stuff like that, because they're on the edge. They have more opportunities. They're typically the position they're playing is more centered on making more plays away from the line of scrimmage. So at least in Solomon Thomas's case, the fact that he was able to produce relatively well compared to DNs and 3-4 outside linebackers is a positive. And when you look at his data here, he had a 90.71 solo tackle market share score, 57.34 sack market share score, and 85.21 tackle for loss market share score. As you can clearly see, he pretty much hits every single threshold you're looking for when it comes to solo tackle market share and tackle for loss market share when it comes to all-pro potential, with the only sort of question mark in terms of his sack market share. He only had a 57.34 sack market share production score, and this is just because, again, most of the time defensive end 3-4 outside linebackers make up the higher percentage of sacks when it comes to the defense when you compare those two positions differently. However, the one thing I can say is he's pretty dang close to the Pro Bowl threshold when it comes to this, and very, very similar to Khalil Mack actually in terms of his overall production profile. In fact, this is Khalil Mack versus Solomon Thomas. Khalil Mack was a little bit more productive in terms of solo tackle market share, but they do have a very similar sort of data pattern, with Khalil Mack being better in terms of sacks. But then again, keep in mind that Khalil Mack wasn't playing inside as a defensive tackle or a 5-tech. He was playing a more traditional kind of strong side linebacker, 3-4 outside linebacker type of role. But the bottom line is I don't really see too many issues with Solomon Thomas in terms of his DN/3-4 outside linebacker production profile. And when you take into the fact that he was playing a position that is not conducive to putting up these types of numbers at the DN and 3-4 outside linebacker, basically he produced like this compared to players who have easier opportunities, typically speaking, defensive end, let's refer outside linebackers have a better chance of getting solo tackle market share, sack market share, tackle for loss market share, and Solomon Thomas was still able to produce like a 3-4 or D end, and he was not really playing that role traditionally for most of the season. So I think this is really more of a positive than a negative, especially since when you look at him as a defensive tackle, like I showed you before, he pretty much hit every single threshold you're looking for when it comes to his production at the defensive tackle position. And then lastly, when you get to his athleticism compared to DN/3-4 outside linebackers, he's pretty much amazing. He has a 95.68 explosive lower body strength score, 94.81 speed score, and 98.94 flexibility score. All of his numbers pretty much hit the bare minimums when it comes to explosiveness, speed, and flexibility. And in many ways, he's just a high-end athlete overall at the DN/3-4 outside linebacker position. So there's really nothing preventing him from being a special player in terms of that sort of way. And in many ways, I'd compare him kind of to Khalil Mack on paper, just because if you look at Khalil Mack's athleticism here, very similar. And of course, if you go back to the production data I just showed you, very similar as well. The only difference, of course, is that Solomon Thomas was playing mostly inside, while Khalil Mack was mostly a linebacker/3-4 outside linebacker type at Buffalo. For the most part, when we look at Solomon Thomas's profile, there's really no negatives to look at. I really don't understand the sort of consensus to kind of poo-poo him away or say that he was this massive reach and all this other kind of stuff. And I think a real sort of comparison for me, if you want to like say, well, has there ever been a player like this before? I think the main guy you look to is Justin Smith. Justin Smith coming out of Missouri, if you go back to his data, he was he was about 6'4", 260 plus pounds, very similar to Solomon Thomas in that sort of way. His production This is actually Justin Smith's production. He had a 99.79 solo tackle market share score, 98.09 sack market share score, and 92.45 tackle for loss market share score. Of course, this was hit with him kind of playing a DN role. And then when you look at his defensive tackle athleticism scores, he had a 51.57 explosive lower body strength score and a 93.76 speed score. In many ways, Justin Smith had to develop into the type of guy that he was, because he eventually got to the point where he was a 3-4 defensive end full time and was producing as such, and was actually pretty dang good as well. But I think in Solomon Thomas's case, he's actually kind of better than Justin Smith, only because, as you clearly see, Solomon Thomas coming out is much more explosive than him. And I think when you think of the fact that Justin Smith coming out of college wasn't playing the exact same sort of scheme, technique that Thomas was playing, that it also kind of aged in the fact that Thomas wasn't as productive as he possibly could have. But then again, if he was playing defensive end full time, he might have actually have been better in terms of sack market share and TFL market share and those other sort of markers. So realistically, I can't really say anything negative about Solomon Thomas. He's not like the most perfect prospect ever, but in many ways there's more positives than negatives when it comes to his overall profile. He pretty much hits all the sort of things you're looking for when it comes to defensive tackles in terms of his data, and his defensive end data is enough that you could actually make a case that whether he's playing defensive tackle or defensive end, he could have a similar career path to a Khalil Mack because of how similar his athleticism is on top of his production is to Khalil Mack, with the only sort of difference in that Khalil Mack actually had an easier time of getting his production because he was playing a position that made it a little bit easier to produce in the sort of ways that Solomon Thomas wasn't really able to do. And that's just specifically at the DN position. So really not a lot of negatives. I think the potential with him is pretty much sky high. I mean, this is a guy as a defensive tackle could end up being a multiple All-Pro type. As a defensive end, he might end up being more of a Pro Bowl type, but has the potential to be an outlier because of his overall athleticism, and on top of that, his solo tackle market share and those other sort of markers. So I think Solomon Thomas is going to be a very good player. Again, lots of positives, lots of things to point towards success, and it's really just a matter of what position he feels, whatever position he ends up doing, whether it's defensive end or defensive tackle. I think he's going to have a ton of success because of his athletic ability and the fact that he's able to look very well production-wise, whether you put him with the defensive ends or the defensive tackles. So again, my name is James Coburn. You can find my work at draftcoburn.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Geometrics. And if you like this content and you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Share this video as well with anybody that you know. And I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.